Good morning, sir. I am Nuraima Ikusain and I am the first reporter in Chapter 1 entitled Assessment as an Integral Part of Teaching. So, assessment as an integral part of teaching refers to the idea that assessment is an essential component of the teaching process. It emphasizes the importance of incorporating various forms of assessment throughout the instructional journey to enhance students' learning and guide instructional decisions. So now, let's proceed to the assessment in the context of teaching learning. So, in the context of teaching learning, we can talk about the diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment. So what is diagnostic assessment? This assessment is a form of free assessment that allows teachers to determine individual students' prior knowledge, including misconceptions before instruction. So, our key term here is the prior knowledge and before instruction. In short, it is a primarily used to diagnose what students already know and what they don't yet know, in order to guide instruction. So, the result of diagnostic assessment also provide a basis for comparison to determine how much learning has taken place after the learning activity is complete. So, this is usually done by giving diagnostic pre-test. Next is we have a formative assessment. So, when we say a formative assessment, this takes place during instruction. So, just like diagnostic, this is done prior knowledge. When we say a formative, this takes place during instruction to provide the teachers with information regarding how will the learning objectives of a given learning activity are being met. In formative assessment, teachers monitor students' learning to get ongoing feedback to improve their teaching and for students to improve their learning. So, in formative assessment, students are helped to identify the strengths and weaknesses and target areas that need to work. Likewise, teachers are also helped to recognize where students are struggling and so address problems immediately. It is evidence-based improvement of ongoing teaching learning. It is not sound to assess learning only at the end of a unit. Many teachers has presumed everything is clear to students only, to get frustrated at the end of the unit that a lot of things were not understood. It is like proceeding to XYZ when ABC were not yet mastered. It is not only frustrating but also a waste of teaching, learning time, and effort. A formative assessment is refers to an assessment for learning because it is meant to ensure that learnings take place. In the process of instruction, the teacher checks on students' learning. If he or she discover that concept and skills are not yet mastered, right, there are then the teachers reteaches to ensure learning. Thus, the praise assessment for learning. How do teachers do formative assessment? Teachers can determine students' level of understanding while teaching by asking students questions. I usually questions that teachers ask to find out if their students can follow the lessons is, did you understand, class? Class usually responds in the chorus, yes ma'am or yes sir. A better way to check on students' level of understanding, however, is to find out if indeed they understood the lesson by asking them questions or using other ways of formative assessment. So now let's proceed to the last part, which is the summative assessment. So, when we say summative assessment, this is used to evaluate students' learning at the end of a defined instructional period. As you can see here, when we say a formative assessment, this takes place during e-instruction, while when we say or when we're talking about a summative assessment, it takes place at the end of the instructional period. So while formative assessment, it is refers to a assessment for learning. The summative assessment refer to assessment of learning. So it is assessment of learning because at the end of a unit, a program, or subject, or after diagnostic assessment teaching and a formative assessment are done, so it is a picture of how much learning took place and to what extent the learning or chapter, the unit, or the course outcomes were attained. So, the result of a summative assessment are the basis of the grades. A summative assessment are done through paper and pencil test and non-paper and pencil test. You have learned how to construct paper and pencil tests for one semester in the first course on assessment. In this second course on assessment, you will learn how to construct non-paper and pencil tests. You will have a more lengthy discussion on non-paper and pencil tests in chapter 4. And that would be all. So let's proceed to the second reporter.
Good day, everyone. My report is all about the traditional assessment and authentic assessment. So, what is traditional assessment? Traditional assessment includes the paper and pencil test. Paper and pencil tests are either the selected response type or constructed response. When we say paper and pencil test, it is a test wherein students needed paper and pencils to answer a certain questions. Just like quizzes and exams inside the classroom or we usually did inside the classroom. That is one of the example of paper and pencil tests. So, in traditional assessment, it measures students' knowledge of the lesson, then requires the student to demonstrate knowledge by selecting a response or giving a correct answers that usually tests students' proficiency through paper and pencil tests. And also, it requires students to practice their cognitive ability to recall, recognize, and reconstruct the knowledge that has been taught by their teachers. So, what is selected response type? Selected response type under traditional assessment is an assessment wherein the students need to select the correct answer, just like true or false, yes or no, check or X, multiple choice, and matching type that you usually did inside the classroom are the example of selected response type. As you can see in your screen, there are an example of the said selected response type assessment. So, what is constructed response type? Constructed response type under traditional assessment is an assessment wherein students need to construct their answers. It is also a paper and pencil test that usually did in the classroom, just like essay, short answer solving problem assessment inside the classroom. Authentic assessment. So what is authentic assessment? Assessment is termed authentic because students and skill are assessed in a context that approximates the real world or real life as closely as possible. The assessment requires student performance that models realistic encounters in life, in contrast to taking a written test or writing an essay. That is why authentic assessment is likewise called performance assessment. So, authentic assessment is a form of assessment in which students are asked to perform real-world tasks that demonstrate meaningful application of knowledge and skills. So that's why it is being called performance assessment, because in this assessment, students requires performance in contrast to traditional assessment that is a written test or writing an essay, a paper and pencil test. While in authentic assessment, it is a performance-based. Authentic assessment is also known as non-traditional assessment and alternative assessment. It is referred to as an alternative assessment because it offers students more choices than just taking a paper and pencil test like multiple choice or an essay. The word alternative implies that there is another way of assessing learning other than the traditional or pencil and paper tests that we have been used. Authentic assessment can be in the form of students' performance to display skills learned, mastery of a process or procedure, or in the form of a product or concrete output. So, authentic assessment is also known as non-traditional assessment and alternative assessment because it gives opportunity to the students to have a more choice than just taking a paper and pencil test, just like multiple choice or an essay. And it provides them opportunities to construct meaning and new knowledge out of what has been taught by performance tasks or performance assessment. Instead of just recalling information, students has opportunity to develop their skills and abilities in performance tasks or performance assessment in authentic assessment. So here are some examples of performance. Dancing is an example of performance task under MAPE or PE subject, and dribble the ball is also under MAPE or PE subject as an example of performance task. To send an email, to give a report in class using PowerPoint are also a performance task because they are demonstrating using PowerPoint presentation and sending an email. To set up an experiment is also example of performance task because you are experimenting, and to lobby at the municipal council is also a performance task. So what is the difference between traditional assessment and authentic assessment? So in traditional assessment, it measures students' knowledge and demonstrate knowledge by selecting a correct answer or giving a correct answer, and practice cognitive ability by recalling, recognizing, and reconstruct the knowledge that has been taught. While in authentic assessment, it measures students' ability to apply knowledge. It requires or it demonstrates knowledge through performance tasks, and it gives opportunity for students to construct new knowledge out of what has been taught. So that's all. Thank you for listening.
Good day everyone. So in this video, I am going to explain you the continuation of our topic. So let us proceed to the norm and criterion reference assessment. So, the first thing that I will be explaining to you is that what is criterion reference assessment? So, when we say criterion reference assessment, it is a type of assessment where a student's performance is compared against a predetermined standard or a criterion of success. So, meaning, the focus is on whether the students meet or exceeds the standard without consideration of other students' performance. So what the teacher's doing is this what we call CAT scores. They are using it to categorize students into different level of achievement, such as basic, proficient, and advanced students. For example, if the intended learning outcome is for the student to spell out at least 18 out of 20 words correctly, only students who meet or exceed this criterion are considered to have achieved the standard. So, the advantage of criterion reference assessment is that you as a teacher, you are able to know who among your students are the advanced one, the proficient one, and the students who are having difficulties in understanding your topic. So, it is nice for you as a teacher because after evaluating them and knowing what are their weaknesses and strengths, you are able to know what is the right solution for every needs of your students, and you are able to give the right solution and the right help for them that they really need. Let us proceed to the norm reference assessment. In contrast, norm reference assessment compares a student's performance to the performance of a norm group, which can be nationwide group or a specific group, such as 7th graders in a particular school system. The focus here is on how a student's performance compares to other in the norm group. This type of assessment provides information about a student's relative standing or rank among their peers. So, meaning, if we are going to compare the two, which is the criterion reference assessments and the norm reference assessments, let us suppose that you received a score of 90% on a math exam in school. This could be interpreted in both ways. So, if the CAT score was 80%, you clearly passed. That is the criterion reference interpretation. And if the average score was 75, then you performed at the top of the class. This is the norm reference interpretation. Same tests, both interpretation are possible. And in this case, it is valid interpretation for your examination. It was just, they use the norm and the criterion reference assessment. So, it depends on the teacher on what he or she will going to use to interpret your grades. So, by this time, I hope that you have understand what is norm reference assessments and the criterion reference assessment. So, this time, let us proceed to the contextualized assessment and the contextualized assessment. So, let us just explain first what is contextualized assessment. So, in this assessment, it emphasizes the application of knowledge and skills in real-world context. So, it utilizes performance-based tasks that are authentic and require higher-order thinking skills. So, it is not like the traditional way of assessing your students that they are just using their pen or their notebook for them to be able to learn or apply the knowledge and skills that they have. But then, let them experience it and apply it in real-world context. For example, instead of testing a student's understanding of what is subject-verb agreement through a multiple-choice test, a contextualized assessment might require the student to deliver a speech where they must correctly apply subject-verb agreement rules. This type of assessment focuses on the student's ability to transfer their knowledge to real-life situations. It is actually helpful because sometimes there are some students who actually memorizes what is the meaning of subject-verb agreement, but they cannot even apply it when they are actually constructing a sentences or a paragraph. So it is very helpful for them to experience such authentic assessment so that you can really assess their learning skills when it comes to the topic that you are trying to teach them. On the other hand, the contextualized assessment assesses declarative or procedural knowledge in artificial or detached situation that do not necessarily have a direct connection to real-life contexts. It often includes written exams that test a student's understanding of concepts or procedures. Both contextualized and decontextualized assessment have their roles in evaluating learning outcomes. However, it is important to strike a balance between assessing declarative knowledge and real-life application. Because sometimes, the contextualized assessment may overlook the functional knowledge that emerges from declarative knowledge. So, it is crucial for you as a teacher to assess both aspects appropriately to ensure a comprehensive evaluation of students' learning. So, maybe you can use the both thing for you to be able to enhance the learning of your students. You can assess them through the contextualized assessment and also the contextualized assessment. And sometimes it's just depending on the topic that you teach them. And now, let us proceed to the establishing high quality assessment. So, establishing high quality assessment is vital for effective and meaningful learning outcomes. There are several key factors to consider when designing assessments. And how can you make a quality assessment? So, the first one is that quality assessment are in accordance with contemporary view of active learning and motivation. Alignment with active learning and motivation, high-quality assessment should align with the contemporary views of active learning and motivation. This means that learners are actively engaged in discovering and constructing meaning, setting and working towards their goals, linking new information with existing knowledge, and developing critical thinking and creative skills. So that assessments should also promote self-monitoring skills, positive expectations for learning, confidence in skills, and internal motivation. Additionally, assessments should focus on the application of knowledge to real-world situations and effective communication. That is according to Soundtrack 2009. So, this means that we can just say that the assessment is valid if it is measures what it is supposed to measure, especially on how well the learning outcomes have been attained by the teacher. So, it means that the teacher should assess what they are supposed to assess as stated in the learning outcomes. This requires alignment between the intended learning outcomes, teaching learning activities, and assessments. So, the concept of constructivist alignment as proposed by John Biggs emphasizes the connection between these elements, and it's essential for ensuring validity in outcome-based education. And the third one is the assessment of high quality is reliable. So when we can say that the assessment is reliable, we can say that the assessment is actually reliable when the test produces consistent scores. For instance, if you give a test or retest in math and found out that those who got high scores in the first take also got high scores in the second take of the same test, and those who got low scores in the first take also get low in the retest of the same test, then the assessment is reliable. So, if the opposite happens, such that those who secured high in the first take got low scores in the retest, and those who got low scores in the first take scored high in the retake, then the assessment is not reliable. Because when we say reliability, reliable assessments produce consistent scores. Because at the first place, the goal of a reliable assessment is to ensure that the assessment results are not influenced by factors other than the student's abilities or performance. And the fourth one is the assessment of high quality is fair. So when we can say that the assessment is actually fair, it is a fair assessment if it assesses what it is supposed to be assessed as stated in the learning outcomes, which is expected to have been taught. This is a principle of constructive alignment in action. Obviously, assessing learners on something they have not been taught is unfair assessment. It is also unfair if it is biased against a subgroup of students. But the question is how and when. So, we can actually say that our assessment is an unfair one when your assessment includes content or items that reinforce negative stereotypes or unfairly penalize certain subgroup of students based on their ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, religion, or even their disabilities. For example, when you are including test items that portray certain group in discriminatory manner or designing assessments that privilege students from more affluent backgrounds while disadvantaging those from lower socioeconomic status, it is actually unfair. Another example is when a teacher decides to see how well students can collaboratively solve problems which require students to work together synchronously online, where only affluent students who can afford to have a laptops and internet connectivity can participate, while students from the lower economic status will be deprived of the collaboration problem solving. It is actually unfair because it can cause discrimination, or it is somehow discriminatory approach to your students. It is not fair. As an educator, you are actually required to respect them and also to treat them equally. You should not give an assessment that is just applicable for some of your students because it is biased. Let us just say you gave them an activity and only beautiful who can perform on this assessment, then it is biased. Some of the students will think that you are a favoritism one. So it can cause a negative impact on them, or they can maybe think that you are discriminating them according to their faces. So let us just do our obligations as their teacher, which is to teach them, and the last one is to respect them in a way that you are teaching them equally. Going back to the topic, I just wanted to add something that for the information of everybody, by establishing assessment that aligned with active learning and motivation, ensuring validity, reliability, and fairness, educators can create an assessment frameworks that supports and enhances the learning process for all of your students. That will be all. This is Saima Sanday Daraba. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
Good day everyone and Assalamu alaikum. I am Ahmad Marjanati. So my assigned topic is current trends and assessment. So we have 7 current trends and assessment cited by Sunstruck 2009. So number 1, using at least some performance-based assessment. Number 2, examining higher level cognitive skills and emphasizing integrated rather than isolated skills. Number 3, using multiple assessment method. Number 4, having high performance standards including world-class standards for interpreting assessment results. Number 5, involving students in all aspects of assessment. Number 6, making standards and criteria public rather than private and secretive. And the last one is using computer as part of assessment. So the number 1, using at least some performance-based assessment. This means that the use of objective tests such as alternative response, multiple choice, and matching type is no longer adequate. So according to Carol Snyder, President of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, employers say our world is not a multiple choice world. Don't send us graduates who only know how to solve multiple choice problems. Instead, as Snyder continues, employers are asking for what educators call a modern liberal education, more big picture thinking, but with more real world applications. Which means it is suggests that employers are asking for what educators refer to as a modern liberal education. So this type of education goes beyond just acquiring knowledge in specific subject areas. It emphasizes the development of skills such as our critical thinking, problem solving, and communication, and also the adaptability. So employers want graduates who can apply their knowledge and skills to real world situation and make meaningful contribution. So in addition, employers are not only interested in candidates who can answer multiple choice questions correctly, so they are looking for individuals who have a broader understanding of the world, can think critically, and can apply their knowledge and skills to real world problems. For instance, let's say there's a job opening at a technology company for a software engineer. So the company is looking for candidates who not only have a strong technical background but also possess the ability to think critically and apply their skills in real world scenarios. So a candidate who has only been trained to solve multiple choice problems may excel at answering technical questions on a test but struggle when it comes to applying the knowledge to practical situations. On the other hand, a candidate with a modern liberal education, as described by Carol Snyder, would have a broader skill set. For example, this candidate might have participated in group projects during their education where they had to collaborate with others and apply their technical knowledge to solve real-world problems. They might have also taken courses that focus on critical thinking, problem solving, allowing them to analyze complex issues and come up with innovative solutions. So, this does not mean that we have to set aside the use of objective tests in assessment. Not at all. Objective test traditional assessment complement performance-based assessment, but in the use of objectives alone won't suffice. So which means, according to Snyder, so hindi lang tayo tinitrain to answer suggest the multiple choices. Dahil ang multiple choices lang is nasa lower, which means to remember or the low recall from our topic. But according to Snyder is to be ready in the real world and think critically think critically and apply our knowledge in the real world situation. So, number two is examining higher level cognitive skills and emphasizing integrated rather than isolated skills. So, these higher level cognitive skills include problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, drawing or inferences, strategic thinking. That is why it is not enough to make use of objective tests that assess simple recall. So, certainly, when we talk about examining higher level cognitive skills and emphasizing integrated skills, we are referring to the importance of possessing skills such as problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, drawing inferences, and strategic thinking. These skills go beyond simple recall of information and require students to apply their knowledge and think critically. So, the objective tests, such as multiple choices tests, primarily assess a student's ability to recall information. Sa multiple choices lang is dito nabibase yung ability ng isang students to recall information. While these tests have their place in assessing certain types of knowledge, they may not effectively measure higher order thinking skills. So, for instance, a multiple choice questions might ask a student to select the correct definition of a term, which only requires them to recall the information they have memorized. So on the other hand, when we talk about higher level cognitive skills, it involves the ability to analyze, evaluate, and apply knowledge in complex and real-world situations. So let's consider a few examples to illustrate this. So, from the problem-solving skills, instead of asking students to simply memorize a formula, a math teacher might present them with a real-world problem that requires them to apply the formula to find a solution. This challenges students to think critically and use their problem-solving skills. And let's proceed to the critical thinking. In literature class, instead of asking students to summarize a story, the teacher might ask them to analyze a character's motivation and actions, make connection to the broader themes, and evaluate the author message. This encourages students to think critically and develop their own interpretations. So, dito sa higher level cognitive skills, it's talk about also the problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, and our strategic thinking. So, hindi lang tayo nagpo-focus sa multiple choices. Dahil ang multiple choices is, dito lang is to recall information, kung ano lang yung ating na-memorize. So, in critical thinking, ay dito na napapaloob ang ating higher level cognitive skills kung paano tayo mag-isip in a deep or in a big picture of the certain assessment. So, the third one is using multiple assessment methods. So, to assess students, a current trend is used to use multiple methods from multiple choices tests to essay an interview, a project, or portfolio to self-evaluation. Again, it is emphasized that we have not to do away with objective tests that measure simple recall. These tests that require simple recall complement authentic assessment tools. So using a multiple assessment methods refers to the practice of employing a variety of evaluation techniques to assess students' learning. This approach recognizes that different methods can provide different insights to students' knowledge, skills, and abilities. It involves using a combination of assessment methods, including both objective tests and more authentic assessment tools. So here are the examples. In objective tests such as multiple choices tests are commonly used to assess students' knowledge and understanding of specific content. This test typically measures simple recall of information and can be useful for assessing factual knowledge or basic concept. For example, a biology teacher might use a multiple choices test to assess students' understanding of the parts of a cell or their knowledge of different species. So, in the AC type, AC are form of subjective assessment that allow students to demonstrate their understanding of a topic in a more detailed and analytical manner. Students are given the opportunity to express their thoughts, provide evidence, and construct arguments. And for the interview provide a way to assess students' oral communication skills, critical thinking, and ability to articulate their ideas. During an interview, students can engage in conversation with the assessor, respond to questions, and discuss their thought process. And then for the project, it involves students working on extended assessment, assignment, or tasks that require them to apply their knowledge and skills to real-world situations. So this could include research project, group presentation, or creative project. And for a portfolio, portfolios are a collection of students' work over a period of time that showcase their progress, achievements, and reflection. They can include a range of artifacts such as essays, project, artwork, or reflection. So, the last one is self-evaluation. Self-evaluation involves students reflecting on their own learning, progress, and achievements. This can be done through a self-assessment, forms reflection, or self-evaluation rubrics. By using multiple assessment methods, educators can gather a more comprehensive understanding of students' knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, again, the objective test that measures sample recall can complement more authentic assessment tools like essay, project, portfolios, interviews, and self-evaluation, which provide a deeper insight into student higher order thinking skills, creativity, and application of knowledge. So, the next one is having a high performance standards, including world-class standards for interpreting assessment result. So, having a high performance standards in education means setting expectation for students to achieve at high level of proficiency and excellence. It involves establishing rigorous criteria and benchmarks that challenge students to strive for their best and reach their full potential. By setting high standards, educators motivate students to aim higher and continuously improve their skills and knowledge. So, the research says one's level of performance is lower than one's level of aspiration. It is therefore sound to challenge students to meet high performance standard. So, when we are going to setting expectation, high performance standards involve clearly communicating to students what is expected of them in terms of their academic performance, skills, and behavior. This can be done through the use of learning objectives, rubrics, or performance criteria. So, for example, a math teacher might set the expectation that students should be able to solve complex algebraic equations accurately and efficiently. So, the rigorous criteria, high performance standards require the use of rigorous criteria to evaluate student work. This means establishing clear and specific criteria for success and providing detailed feedback to help students understand how they can improve. For instance, the English teacher might use a rubric that assesses the quality of students' writing based on criteria such as organization, clarity, and use of evidence. So when we talk about the world class, it is world class standards refer to setting benchmark that align with the highest international standard in education. This means aiming for excellence that is comparable to or exceeds the performance of students in top performing countries for institution. So this This means that one's level of performance is lower than one's level of aspiration. It is therefore sound to challenge students to meet high performance standard. So by setting high performance standards, educators can create an environment that challenges students to excel and reach their highest potential. This not only promotes academic achievement but also fosters sense of ambition, self-confidence, and a drive for continuous learning and improvement. It is important to note that while high performance standards are essential, it is equally important to provide appropriate support, guidance, and resources to help students meet those standards. So the next one is involving students in all aspects of assessment. It works if the students are involved from the setting of expected targets to be demonstrated after instruction to checking on their progress in the course of the teaching learning process and to finally determine the extent to which they realize expected target. So when we are going to involving students in all aspect of assessment means actively engaging them in the assessment process. From the initial goal setting stage to monitoring their progress and ultimately determining the extent to which they have achieved the expected target. So this approach recognizes the importance of students' ownership and empowerment and their own learning journey. So, for example, setting expected targets involving students in assessment begins with setting clear and meaningful learning targets or goals. Educators can collaborate with students to establish this target, ensuring that they understand what is expected of them and have a sense of ownership over their learning. So, when we set a aspect of assessment, we have to monitor the process. Throughout the teaching and learning process, students should be actively involved in monitoring their own progress. They can regularly assess their understanding skills and growth in relation to the established target. This can be done through self-reflection, self-assessment, or peer assessment. So, when we are going to checking progress with feedback alongside self-assessment, teachers can provide timely and constructive feedback to guide student progress. This feedback should be specific, actionable, and focused on helping students understand their strengths and areas of improvement. So, by involving students in all aspects of assessment, educators promote student agency, self-reflection, and metacognition. It helps students develop a deeper understanding of their own learning and progress, fosters a sense of responsibility, and enhance their ability to set and achieve meaningful goals. So, So the next one is making standards and criteria public rather than private and secretive. So according to Sandtrack 2009, MacTai 2013 says the evaluative criteria such as rubrics are presented and explained at the beginning. So the statement from MacTai 2013 emphasized the importance of presenting and explaining the evaluative criteria, such as rubrics, to students at the beginning of an assessment. It suggests that providing clear criteria for success and showcasing models of excellence aligned with those criteria can help alleviate students' fear or negative attitude towards assessment. So the last one is using computers as part of assessment. With computers, a bank of questions can be created, which makes it possible for each student to be presented with different questions but are of equivalent standard. So the last one, by the using of computers as part of assessment can offer several advantages in terms of flexibility, efficiency, and accuracy. So incorporating computers into assessment process can enhance the overall experience for both students and the teachers. The ability to create a bank of questions allows for greater variety of customization and assessment. So each student can be presented with different questions, so ensuring that they are challenged appropriately while maintaining an equivalent standard. So this personalized approach can help cater to individual learning needs and provide a fair assessment for all students. So, for instance, in a language learning program, a computer-based assessment can generate different sets of questions for each student, assessing their listening, reading, writing, and speaking skills at their appropriate level. So, furthermore, so the computers facilitate the recording of assessment result and enable statistical analysis. So this streamlines the assessment process by automating the collection and organizing of data, making it easier for educators to track students' progress, identify trends, and generate reports. So that's all my report. Rather, thank you for listening.